Hello and welcome again to Occupation Station. I'm Diane Donato, and today our guest is Tom Long. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Pleased to be here.
You were involved in manufacturing, engineering, packaging, management at some of the biggest names in the industry over your career, and it looks like you also spent a short time after graduating working in retail pharmacy. So let's talk about your career journey. Tell us how it all unfolded.
Well, upon graduation from Albany College of Pharmacy, my goal was really to actually own my own pharmacy in Lake Placid, New York. And I will say right up front that that is a goal that I did not achieve. I started in retail pharmacy at the time, having to take various state board exams and so on. And upon finalizing and passing the state boards, I started in retail pharmacy, but had a call from Bristol Laboratories in Syracuse, New York, asking if I would have any interest in considering really an entry-level position in the manufacturing area. I discussed this with my wife and decided that, hey, this is an opportunity that may not come along in the future, and I thought I would give it a try. I felt it would be easier to get back into retail pharmacy if I wanted to, and yet difficult to get into industry. So I began my journey. I started with Bristol Laboratories really as in an entry-level position in manufacturing, supervising a group of people who were actually producing capsules. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed relating to the people, really understanding many of the things in the industry that came along with some of my education from pharmacy. Shortly after, I was offered a further position to enhance the number of manufacturing units that I supervised. I did that, and I guess was successful, because after being in the industry for about a year, they actually offered me a position in technical services to help with the transition of products from product development into manufacturing. I did that for about a year, and again, had quite a bit of success. And I might say one of the things that I thought was very helpful in understanding industry based on my education were many of the things that in our pharmaceutical education we really began to understand, such as when developing a product, what is dissolution? What is content uniformity? What does bioavailability mean? What are some of the labeling requirements? What can adversely impact a drug's performance? Storage conditions, looking at overall stability, etc. What we had learned in college also applied, or certainly in industry. I was promoted to really run the entire non-parenteral manufacturing area. And I emphasize non-parenteral because sterile operations were not included at that time. And progressing, I was further promoted into overseeing some of the sterile operations, the packaging operations, and then eventually within Bristol oversaw the entire manufacturing process for pharmaceuticals. So my education gave me some basis for what I was doing. I began in the industry, and once in the industry, really I established a lot of what I'm going to call customer relationships, and I'm going to talk about internal customers, working with marketing, working with sales, working with finance, and so on. And I think these areas helped develop myself in a more fuller capacity where I was able to understand the business greater. In the research-based companies versus what I'm going to call the consumer-based companies and so on, the development process is different. The consumer-based companies, they generally are working more with known quantities, and I'm going to be very simple and say aspirin or guaifenesin. The development of a drug, you're starting with a known quantity, and so you're developing a formula that you have to make sure is stable, that it's going to meet all the requirements of a monograph, a drug monograph. Basically, they're published in the Federal Register, and they're kind of a recipe book which covers acceptable ingredients, doses, formulations, and labeling. If you produce a monograph product, you are required to meet all of the requirements of this particular monograph. Now, there are products in the consumer product industry which actually have drugs that have been approved through the NDA process, or the new drug application process. Some of the drugs, however, don't require necessarily in-depth safety because the safety is known. And I will use an example here of Mucinex. Mucinex was produced by a company that I worked for. The main ingredient in Mucinex is guaifenesin. Now, Mucinex has an approved NDA, and the reason that the NDA was required is that Mucinex is a 12-hour product. The monograph did not cover an extended release product. Now, the same thing can be said for other products. There's another product that I'm aware of in a company that, frankly, is aspirin. and they are going through a process to receive an NDA because their labeling will be different than the traditional aspirin product.
And for potential students looking at jobs down the road, how do jobs in the industry vary when you compare working in, say, over-the-counter versus prescription-based drugs?
I think once you get to the development stage, now the development for a research-based company where you may be working with a new entity and so on is a bit more complex because you really have to do an awful lot more work on stability, et cetera. But frankly, once you get past the development process, it's pretty much the same. The Food and Drug Administration has what they refer to as CGMP, or Current Good Manufacturing Practices. Current Good Manufacturing Practices apply to all pharmaceuticals, and the FDA does audit the companies.
In just a moment, I'm going to ask you about career readiness and learning things along the way, but first, a message from Dr. Dewey.
Hi, Greg Dewey. I'm the president of Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. Many of our students will go into community pharmacy. A lot of our students go into hospital pharmacy. There's a small but significant number that go into the pharmaceutical industry. And this is an industry that is seeing some really exciting changes and changes that have created real workforce needs within the industry and needs which pharmacy and health sciences students are specifically suited to approaching them. Historically, in the history of the pharmaceutical industry, everything was about natural products that were small molecules that ultimately could be synthesized. So aspirin comes from willow bark. You don't extract it from willow bark anymore. You synthesize it, an organic chemist synthesizes it in the lab, or Tylenol, the same thing. In about the 70s and 80s, when biotechnology came in, that all began to change. And what we've been able to do is to engineer genes to and insert them into microbes, either bacteria or yeast, and have them produce proteins, very, very large molecules that your body usually produces on its own, and make medications about that. So the whole small molecule organic synthesis stuff, while that is still important, we're seeing now this major shift to what we call biopharmaceuticals. Most common example of biopharmaceutical is insulin. So this is the whole biotech hitting the pharmaceutical industry. You need someone with a very unique training that can handle both the manufacturing sophistication but also the science. So manufacturings are changing dramatically. Our PharmDs, because they know the importance of formulation of a drug. Depending on how a drug is formulated, it can be more effective or less effective. They know the importance of sterile conditions. So they're very well suited for that. And so we're building a curriculum to give them entree into that whole new area.
Welcome back. How prepared did you feel going into your career, and then how much did you learn along the way?
I think, coming out of the college, you certainly have an appreciation for pharmaceuticals, whether you're dispensing them, selling them, or producing them. You certainly understand and value the benefits from pharmaceuticals. Patients rely on a drug. The drug is expected to perform. Quality and drug performance are paramount to a patient. I think these are all things that are ingrained in your education. So these are things that you bring from education, you bring with you into industry. I think the way in which you manage people, the way you understand the business and so on, frankly, does take additional studies or additional experience. In my case, most of it was experience, although I did attend various management courses and some financial courses and so on. But again, going back to a comment I previously made about establishing internal relationships, if you work with marketing, and marketing is trying to obviously market the product in a way that is going to be meaningful to the consumer, they may look to you from a manufacturing standpoint as, okay, what is possible from a manufacturing or even a packaging standpoint? Is there a way you can package this that makes it more productive? So these internal relationships really are something that you need to develop, I think, internally, and I think will continue to increase your knowledge of the business. When you work with sales, sales will talk about making sure that you're able to deliver the product to the customer. They do not want to have a product that a customer wants and you can't supply it. So You need to work with sales to make sure you have the appropriate inventories out there. Also meeting your business requirements of not having too much inventory. So it's a balancing act.
What would you recommend students do to make sure that they identify some of those skills and make sure that they try to diversify?
I think that one opportunity, and I think the college, I believe, is now doing quite a bit of this, and that is potentially to get involved in some internship programs. Many of the pharmaceutical companies now offer internship programs, to help an individual develop. Hands-on experience is extremely valuable here.
And you wound up managing some very large groups. How big were the companies and your groups?
It varied considerably. There were probably 3 major companies that I worked for, and as the head of operations in 2 of these, I had multiple sites also. And in one company where I had multiple sites, I had probably, in total, among all the sites, 1,000 people. Now, that would be where I had a plant in New Jersey, a plant in Virginia, a plant in Puerto Rico, and so on. That's adding all these together. Smallest I had, I think, was probably one of the final companies I had, which was Adams Respiratory Therapeutics, which was the manufacturers for Mucinex and a couple of other products. And in that organization, I probably had about 100 people. And very honestly, it was probably one of the best experiences I had in my entire career.
Why was that?
I had tremendous amount of influence over what the company did. I had great relationships with the marketing people and salespeople. We qualified additional suppliers for some of the key ingredients. Not having qualified alternate suppliers would have adverse impact on the company. It was almost as much fun as if it were my own company. I got to the point where I could basically operate almost any of the equipment myself if I wanted to. So I earned the respect, I believe, from the people in working with the people, keeping them informed about the business.
When you think back to when you were a student and you were thinking that you wanted to open your own retail pharmacy, are you amazed at how far your career went in a whole different direction?
Yes, I am. But after I graduated and so on, going into industry was something that people didn't really often consider and want. It seemed like most people at that time were going into retail or the hospital environment. I went into industry, not really knowing where I was going, but I think from some of the things I've said, you can possibly understand that I really loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. In the industry, I had the opportunity to meet several others who had pharmacy degrees, who had positions similar to mine. And I have to say, very honestly, that probably the majority of people who headed up operations, frankly, did not come from the pharmaceutical area. However, 2 or 3 of them that I knew who did come from the pharmaceutical area were with companies that were very, very successful.
So where do you see the fields of pharmacy and health science going?
That's a great question, because the pharmaceutical industry today is obviously continuing to advance the biopharmaceuticals, the neurosciences, and so on. I guess I'm not really qualified right now to say exactly where I think it will go, but the traditional consumer product business, some of the traditional research and development company business where they're producing pharmaceuticals that are prescribed, I think that's always going to be there. And there's always going to be a need for people to come in and manage these operations. The bioscience and so on, I don't want to speak to that because, frankly, I don't think I'm qualified to.
Okay, but it's interesting times.
Very interesting times. It happens that my wife uses one of the newer pharmaceuticals, and, frankly, without the pharmaceutical would be in a wheelchair. And she gets around with about 99% positive mobility. So pharmaceuticals are great. A lot of this discussions about high-priced pharmaceuticals and so on bothers me somewhat because, yes, pharmaceuticals are expensive, but some of the alternate implications, if you don't have them, are catastrophic.
We forget about that part of the discussion.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Tom, that you think would be important to add?
President Dewey at the Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, is focused a lot on his vision and principles and so on, and they have published some core values. And I would encourage people to take a look at those core values because I think that certainly, if not all, 4 out of the 5 easily apply to the pharmaceutical industry. Student-centered, where there's mutual respect, yes, that is certainly critical. That would apply, obviously, across the board. When you start talking about integrity, respect, collaboration, things like that, those are key not just to the university, but I believe to the success of any company. I think individuals must look at these values and embrace these values in order to be successful.
More than lofty words.
That's right.
Tom Long, most recently retired from Adams Respiratory Therapeutics, we thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you.
For more information or to schedule a tour, visit acphs.edu. You can tune in to all of our informative stories at acphs.edu/podcast. Each podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify, giving you the opportunity to listen from a mobile device. Mark Occupation Station as a favorite, and you'll receive push notifications as soon as we publish something new. Thanks for joining us on Occupation Station.